Hey guys, what's up? RossDunneIE here again, and it is warm today, boys. It is definitely toasty, and it's heavy. It's oppressive heavy. It's hard on you. It sits on you like a fucking blanket wrapped around you, like a hot, warm blanket wrapped around you that you didn't want. That's in your personal space. You didn't ask for it. It's right there. You can probably hear my fan in the background, maybe. I'll try and get rid of that noise in post-production, but you're just gonna have to deal with it, because I just can't handle not having that on right now. And I want to talk about a couple of things. I wanna, it's been a while since I've talked about anything with regards to Gamergate, and I think it's been a while since anyone's really been making videos on Gamergate. I think the conversation has been moving onwards. The GamerGate's started a conversation about what we call quote-unquote regressive leftism. And that was really a good genesis for that. But I feel that there was a couple of conversations left unhad on the subject of Gamergate. And that there's some truth to the idea, in many ways, that the age-old ideological standard of left v right very much resembles a horseshoe at their extreme points. They begin to resemble each other in their execution far more than they'd ideally like to admit. I mean, I consider myself to be a progressive person. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not even ashamed, believe it or not, to still call myself a feminist or a progressive, in spite of the fact that on the internet, both of these groups, honestly, they appear to be doing more harm than good. But in this instance, I specifically refer to the increasing moralizing of the progressive left when it comes to internet social spheres, and specifically Twitter. I mean, I grew up in a relatively regressive part of the world during the 80s and the 90s, and I watched as a socially conservative morality dictated the actions of the majority. And in doing so, helped to alienate the minority in a way that was sometimes violent and honestly pretty repressive. I think we on the left have fought for a very long time to allow people to express themselves in ways that they couldn't previously. We've been the proverbial sociological spear tip in allowing people to develop and helping society to advance. So why now, in this age of progress, do we find ourselves increasingly behaving like the same moral dictators that we so righteously fought in the past to defeat? Recently, we've watched a powerful social cabal expose themselves in the fires of the Gamergate controversy. Examples like this include people like Josh McIntosh, Randy Harper, who fight for a future wherein we self-censor or socially censor people and ideas that don't conform to their ideological narrative. I think this was expressed quite well in Anita Sarkeesian's relatively recent words at the Sydney Feminism Symposium, wherein she somehow managed to sit next to Germaine Greer and attack the concept of individual liberation and the adoption of freedom of expression as an act of personal growth, which exists within an individual set of principles. To make that last sentence a little easier to handle, I suppose, Anita basically said that individual liberty wasn't important, or isn't important. So now I've been accused of having, realistically, a soft spot for socialism, and honestly, I do. I have a soft spot for economic socialism, but I suppose I'd weigh myself more so towards the classical European libertarianism, not for the love of God to be confused with American modern libertarianism, for the love of fuck, or I suppose more succinctly, a kind of neoliberalism on a social level. Now let's not delve into it too much, but for the most part we can state that the freedoms of the individual and their right to express themselves in a way which does not bring direct harm onto others is a fundamental tenet behind classic liberal ideological viewpoints. People like Anita and John McIntosh and their ilk are increasingly favouring a world wherein people would self-censor a discussion based on a centralised sociological moral dogma. If you give that some thought, that's more or less what the religious ideological narratives also preach. Now that isn't to say, I'm not saying that social justice, quote unquote, is an attempt to build a religious dogma, but it is trying to build a social dogma. A social dogma which actively attempts to censor ideological viewpoints which are contrary to its own. These aren't simple acts of disagreement in a greater discourse, mind you. These are almost militant episodes of anger and righteous temper tantrum throwing, wherein the crowd is increasingly demanding an alteration to our very culture, and by extension in relevance to Gamergate, the culture of gaming. And whilst I'm going to try and avoid using a slippery slope fallacy, because that'd be an obvious sin, but it isn't like the situation hasn't gotten any better recently. It isn't as though we're at a point where these people are willing to listen to facts and reason, and are willing to alter their views as a result. The exact opposite, realistically, is increasingly true of these people, and it presents a genuine danger to us all. And I feel like it's getting worse. I would say that Gamergate put forward an ironic fight for a liberal ideology. I mean, I definitely can't say that a lot of people in Gamergate identify as liberals. In fact, I can, with some degree of confidence, say that they don't. They probably wouldn't be so quick to identify as conservative either, but there's an irony here that people who are routinely accused of being right-wing by social justice, quote-unquote, are defending an inherently left-wing ideology, the freedom of expression. A core ideological axiom of conservative politics is the concept of self-censorship through religious moral dogmatic principles, and yet this has somehow become a core concept through which social justice now acts. I mean, Gamergate in this regard routinely attempts to fight for an individual and a groups to continue to express their individual rights to freedom of expression. And in doing so, it continues to prop up one of the most important liberal ideas of our time, perhaps personified best by the 19th century writer Evelyn Beatrice with, I think her statement was, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," or some such. And for me, that's really what it's all about. A form of ideological Darwinism. Ideas may not always be good, or right, or nice, but they must be aired so that they may be challenged in an arena of thought. To deny people the right to air their ideas, no matter how poor they would be, or how terrible, or how they might spell disaster for the society we've worked so long to build, we must defend people's right to say things that we disagree with. And we most assuredly cannot do violence against those we disagree with as well. My name is RossDunneIE. Peace.